Most of what's getting built on Earth is renewable in terms of the energy sector. And that's really counterintuitive for people because it doesn't align with what they see every day.
I'm really excited to welcome my friend Tom Timmins, who leads the energy practice at Gowling in Toronto.
We were really inventing the wheel, literally, to build the first wind farm. It's a fairly risky venture. And you know what? They managed to do it. They got the thing built. Virtually everything is going to be electrified and carbon is going to be squeezed out of the economy.
Welcome to another episode of Excellence in Global Offshore Wind. I am your host, Philip Bassil, and this week, as always, we have great guests. But this week, I'm really excited to welcome my friend Tom Timmins, who leads the energy practice at Gowling in Toronto. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Philip. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. It's been a long time. You know, we've known each other for a long time, and but why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your role at Gowling? You've been there a long time, the type of projects and maybe the clients you work with.
I think we met back in FIT project days, like in early, might even be in RESOP days. So I'm an energy lawyer. I'm primarily a renewable energy lawyer. So I got involved actually in one of Canada's first wind farms, as it turned out, the Erie Shores wind farm that was built by AIM Power Gen back in the day. And that was a RESOP project. And it was a wonderful, wonderful project, 100 megawatts or 99 megawatts down in southwestern Ontario. So I lead the energy practice at Gowling WLG. And it's actually a great platform to work at. Gowling WLG is an old Canadian law firm that has gone international. So we're one of the larger law firms on Earth. I started in Ottawa way back in sometime ago, Confederation. But there's this wonderful team that I get to work with every day, and made up of pure energy regulatory lawyers, finance specialists, indigenous, tax, IP, that is intellectual property, real estate specialists. So there's all these wonderful specialists who work within the firm. And every day I actually learn something new about the firm, like in terms of people's specialization and their experience. And so that's Gowling WLG, or Gowlings as we used to call it. Yeah, it's been a wonderful platform and a wonderful practice, and thoroughly Canadian. So,
and I know you guys have done some great work, and we've crossed paths over the years. So it's great to see you again. So, and there's some exciting times. I mean, obviously in energy space in Canada specifically, as it relates to offshore wind. You know, we're going to talk a bit more about that, in a few minutes. But what got you into energy? You know, as a lawyer, and just take us back. Are you originally from Ontario?
Well, thanks for asking, Philip. It really started off as this project, and this project came to me. The Erie Shores came to me. I think it was because I was on the board of a nonprofit agency, the Yellow Bike Project, which was called Bike Share, believe it or not, in Toronto. The original Bike Share, which were yellow bikes. And that's how the project kind of ultimately came to me. And I think we did 8 rounds of private equity finance for that project. And we were really inventing the wheel, literally, to build the first wind farm. And when I say we, I was just the lawyer. There was some amazing people involved. Many of them are still involved in the industry, but it aligned well with my my own personal values. And of course, that's the early 2000s. Nobody was talking about climate change, or nobody on the street was talking about climate change. And so it was, it was a fairly risky venture. And then, I was just, I was a young lawyer at the time, and I was like, and I liked the people. I believed in the project. It aligned well. And you know what? They managed to do it. They got the thing built. And they had a RESOP, which is a Renewable Energy Standard Offer Program. That's the jargon. Every time I use an acronym, I owe you $1, Phil. But they got a RESOP contract, and that project is still operating down in southwestern Ontario. And it's and then of course wind was all the rage, and then of course solar came in, and of course the declining cost of solar has just been fascinating thing to watch. Solar goes down in price, like it basically halves every 2 years. So it's just this incredible cost curve that we've been on. And then, of course, batteries started coming in, and then now we're working with AMI, Advanced Metering Initiatives. There's all these different technologies, and I, as a lawyer, I only see my little piece of the elephant, right? And I love the clients, I love the work. And it aligns well. We are, like, at the end of the day, when it comes to renewable energy, like I don't want to sound immodest, but we are saving the world. It has to make sense. It has to hang together. But at the end of the day, it is about climate. And then the other thing that I'll just say is, like, in addition to the generating technologies, there is no transition without transmission. So of course, we've been heavily involved in transmission projects, heavily involved in distribution projects, and so it's been a fun journey. And as well, I get to hang out with guys like you, and it has been really good. Like, and just like you, like when I go to a Canadian Renewable Energy Association event, which used to be the Canadian Solar Industries Association, CANSIA, I see people that I've known for 20 years, 15 years, and like old friends, particularly after the pandemic. Seeing people again is like, hey, you're great to see you're still coming to these things, right? Stuff like that. So
it is a global industry, but it is really a tight group, and it is exciting. You're right. It is important, what we're doing. And I have very obviously strong views on this. The economics have to make sense. As we're seeing in the industry, demand for electricity is really growing, of course, with the hyperscalers and AI and data centers, in addition to electrification and all the activity we've seen on EVs and space heating and so on. So it's exciting to see that the fundamentals are there and very strong, and I think we'll get stronger. What's your view kind of on the industry more broadly, especially with some of the headwinds that we're seeing, both from a regulatory perspective, but also on cost escalations and so on?
What they say in hockey, and I'm sure they say the same in soccer, is playing the body, not the head. Watch the other players. You're playing defense. Watch the other player's shoulders. Watch his or her or their torso to see which way they're going. And if you play the body, not the head in renewables, what you're going to see is most of what's getting built on Earth is renewable in terms of the energy sector, right? And that's really counterintuitive for people because it doesn't align with what they see every day. What you see every day are gas cars and gas furnaces and gas, blast furnaces in factories and, things like that. But at the end of the day, what's getting built, and so where the future is headed, is into the renewable space. And that's true in the United States as well. There was a great article in The Economist a couple of weeks ago about this, really saying like, there's a lot of talk at the federal level, but not a lot of action. And most of these choices are being made at the state level, energy choices. And solar is just too cheap to avoid. It's same with wind. You have to go to a lot of trouble and expense today to build a coal plant. If you're in the, my condolences to people in the coal business, it's getting harder and harder and harder. Same is true of gas. You have to kind of you have to swim upstream pretty hard to be able to build these legacy assets. Whereas solar just keeps getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Great book came out in this summer by Bill McKinnon called Here Comes the Sun. Great statistics in there. And I think McKinnon, he cites 92.4% of the electricity projects that got built on Earth last year were renewable. And like I said, that's counterintuitive to people because what you see every day is this, but what's coming is that. And we are on exponential curves, or two different exponential curves occurring. So it's hard for people to imagine.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. I mean, even you hear, data centers and hyperscalers being encouraged to build gas, behind the meter, and if you want any sort of scale, you're waiting 5 to 7 years for a gas turbine. So, and the cost has doubled, is what we've seen. So, you're right. So the economics, the fundamentals, and then also time to market. It's going to take a long time to build a coal plant or other generation, whereas solar and the renewables are much faster and the cost has come down. So, when we're working with clients, they ask us to help structure partnerships and raise capital, both find strategic partners and bring financial institutional capital. Tell me a bit about when you work with clients. Let's talk about bankability. Specifically around the Canadian offshore wind frontier. Canada's offshore wind industry is quite nascent, but it has massive potential, as you know, particularly in the Atlantic provinces, where I am today in Nova Scotia. From your perspective, what's the single greatest legal and regulatory obstacles that you see in Canada that must be resolved to transition these projects from ambitious provincial announcements to being fully financeable, bankable assets, ready for institutional investors?
I think it's a great question, Phil. The biggest obstacle is you've alluded is not the resource. The resource is massive. It's over 70,000 gigawatts of potential capacity just in the Atlantic. 70,000 gigawatts, not megawatts, gigawatts, right? So, but the real challenge is what I would refer to as the regulatory balkanization interplay between the relay race that has to happen between the federal and provincial levels. And that's part of Canada's story. That is kind of the cost of doing business in Canada. That's also part of what makes Canada great, is that we do have these other governments, different levels of governance, and then also different provincial and territorial governments. But we don't have a one window regulator. I think that's what we're trying to achieve with the Bill C-49, but that one window, the closer we can get to one window, is what will help de-risk these projects. And then getting from the seabed lease to notice to proceed, squeezing that time down, that's the way to go. Anything government, when I say government, I should say governments, anything governments can do to squeeze that and reduce that period of high risk for investors will ultimately attract investment, attract cost-efficient investment, and really build on Canada's strengths. And just to go back to something else that you've mentioned, this isn't the first time we're doing this. Particularly in Atlantic Canada, and I can delve into some of that a little bit later if we get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just a follow-up on that. The one window, and in the U.S., the BOEM, of course, was tasked with that. They're a little less busy now, as we know. How do you see the progress in Canada, happening? Of course, the CNS OEB was officially evolved to cover energy, which includes offshore wind here in Nova Scotia. So the Canadian Nova Scotia Ocean Energy Board is the regulator and life cycle regulator of the industry. So we've seen some progress there, and that's an initiative that's a collaboration between federal and the federal government and the Nova Scotia government. But how do you see the one window that you reference? How do you see that evolving to streamline some of these projects?
CNS OPB, or the creation of the Offshore Energy Board or Offshore Energy Regulators. So evolving from the Offshore Petroleum Board to the Offshore Energy Regulator, that's a big deal that actually went, I think, almost completely unnoticed by the media. And I think people under the age of 65, under the age of 70, might not remember, particularly outside of Atlantic Canada, might not remember any of that history, but really the Atlantic Accord and the disputes that were happening that led to the creation of what we used to call, until literally about 8-9 months ago, a board. Now it's a regulator. So the creation of those two regulatory agencies it's absolutely brilliant. First of all, the political compromise that occurred back in the 80s after all of those court battles between the provinces and the feds over who owned the resources on the continental shelf, and all that kind of silliness. So ultimately there was brilliant political compromise, like just the heart of what it means to be Canadian. And so brilliant compromise. And then the creation of that petroleum board, those two petroleum boards that ran the offshore rigs in one of the most dangerous places on Earth, right? And some of the hardest places to work on Earth. There was initially an early disaster, but after that, billions of barrels, billions of dollars were brought out. And what's great about this is that we're not doing away with those boards. We've retooled them. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're just changing the cargo, The cargo is no longer going to be petroleum. It's going to be clean, renewable electrons coming from amazing resources coming from the offshore. What can we add to that? I would add in defined stop clocks. There has to be a time limit. Capital can be patient, and it can tolerate no, but it can't tolerate 7 years of maybe. The funds and investors, including our pension funds, right? Like that's where this stuff comes from. Can't put up with 7 years of maybe. They can put up with 2 or 3 years of maybe with a hard no at the end. No problem. Everybody understands that. But yeah, putting a stop clock there would be useful.
It makes me think. What from a federal provincial cooperation agreement perspective. What does a successful agreement need to look like? Specifically around shared jurisdiction. Project permitting timelines, to satisfy, the tolerance of the investors, like you mentioned, global private capital and infrastructure funds that will ultimately be involved in this offshore wind space.
I think we actually have it, or we have most of it. Now we're still, it still has yet to be tested. The creation of the CNSOER, or the Canada Nova Scotia Offshore Energy Regulator, which went live January 31st, 2025. Like this is very recent. The amendments came into place. The creation of those two regulatory agencies was done by parallel statute. So it had to happen, one statute had to happen at the federal level, and then another statute had to happen at the provincial level, both in Nova Scotia and in Newfoundland. And so Bill C-49 updated those those three statutes. So that's brilliant. The fact that we are not reinventing the wheel here, and the fact that we're reusing an existing kind of regulatory management platform, I think is very good news for investors. So the Atlantic Accord, as you might recall, it goes back to when you and I were kids, the mid-'80s, 1985, 1986, and creating that joint management structure. That went a long way. And then it's operated since that time very successfully. Billions of dollars have been taken out, and in a very safe environment in what, as I said earlier, is a very hard place to work. And so it has worked, and now it's just simply being retooled. And then the other thing is that there's no transition without transmission. So the federal government needs to be involved, along with indigenous partners, to be involved and to try and make transmission projects continue to happen. And that the idea of a pan-Canadian transmission corridor is, now on the table again. So that's very exciting. I think we're actually in a time of growth. I think we're actually in a very exciting time for Canada and for Canadians and for foreign investors, because this isn't going to happen without foreign investment.
Absolutely. I mean, we are fortunate. The building blocks are there, as you said. We're just changing the cargo. Let's talk a bit about the supply chain. Obviously, one of the elephants in the room is the maturity of the domestic supply chain. The specialized fleets, there's a lack of that currently. We're just getting started in this offshore wind industry in Canada. As a lawyer, I mean, what are the contractual and legal mechanisms, that clients are using to mitigate, some of the risks associated with the global supply chain dependencies there?
We had an aborted attempt at offshore wind in Ontario that ended, I think it was 2014, where we were going to have freshwater offshore wind projects in the Great Lakes. At that time, we had, as lawyers, we kind of ramped up and started to get to know a lot of these things, started to get to know the supply chain. It is a very sophisticated and complex global supply chain that's required to build these platforms and to build these projects. And once again, we are building them in very, very, a very hard place to build things. Other thing, and so at Gowling WLG, of course, we're one of the larger UK law firms as well. Our sister firm in the UK is Gowling WLG UK. And we've had the fortune of being involved with the offshore development in the UK and have seen the development. And this is about ports, it's about port facilities, it's about shipping, and it's about long-term supply contracts, and often dealing with suppliers who might not have existing equipment or plant facilities in the local jurisdiction. So already we're seeing our clients taking a look at the Hibernia and Hebron oil projects as their precedent. So we don't like to invent new things. And what they're saying is Eastern Canada built world-class offshore facilities in the recent past from scratch in Newfoundland in the 1990s. They're writing in what I would call local content off-ramps. So yes, we'll do local content, but if the local content doesn't appear, then we'll do international content. There's going to be, without a doubt, there's going to be something required in order to create jobs onshore and trying to find the right opportunities for local economic development. No doubt about that. And most businesses who are involved in this sector aren't opposed to that. They actually like that. That's a good way to, drive down costs and really build, community buy-in. But really building in those off ramps, and then the other piece is, given that we do lack a mature fleet, no single contractor yet is going to do a full wrap on the EPC of these projects. So what we're seeing are little multi-contracting strategies, and that's fine. If the industry takes off and sets down roots and we achieve commercial operation on some of these projects and we see a pipeline for more power purchase agreements, then the industry will continue to mature. I really have to emphasize that this is big. These are big projects, big ships, big turbines, tough working environments, sophisticated skills. There's only a few places on Earth where this is going to occur, and I don't see why it can't be in the East Coast of Canada.
That's interesting. Maybe one other one, Tom, if you could, we saw obviously during COVID and some of the projects with our southern neighbor get caught with with inflation locking in the supply chain and some of those contracts had to be canceled. Are you seeing some of those elements being addressed in those contracts as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely inflation adders and trying to really who carries the risk. There are some fairly nuanced and sophisticated discussions that occur on that, and who carries the risk and who has the ability to hedge inflation risk best. And sometimes it's something that can't be completely solved, but a lot of thought goes into this. And I remember it was actually during the early days of the pandemic when we were doing contract negotiations in, believe it or not, AMI, advanced metering, where we're like, oh, we're 8%, 9% inflation. Once again, Phil, takes us back to when we were kids, right? Like most of our careers, we have not seen that. I think I was a teenager when we had 20% inflation in Canada, or 18% inflation. So, but yeah, we're back to that. And you know what? What's great about the private sector is that we can deal with it. Like the private sector can deal with that. People are incredibly adaptable, and business people are incredibly creative, right? So they'll find solutions, and maybe that solution passes through to whoever the power purchaser is, and the power purchaser has to accept that there might be inflation, and that inflation can apply across equipment. The general trend in a lot of these things is that the real price of energy goes down over time. That's what's so unique about this. Both wind and solar and storage facilities, the real actual price goes down year by year, right? Although it might, like adjusted for inflation, it goes down. But local labor costs might be going up, local supply costs might be going up, things like that. We've done a lot of work negotiating inflation costs and tying them to a specific industry or product-specific inflation indices, believe it or not. Solar panel prices go down year by year.
No, that's true. I want to touch on a couple of other elements that are key, I think, to the success of offshore wind in Canada. We've seen the Canadian federal government propose significant investment tax credit, the ITC, to really accelerate the transition. In your view, are these ITCs as currently drafted and regulated, truly accelerating M&A and project finance in the space and those type of decisions? And then if, what needs to change? We talked about the stringent labor requirements and so on. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the ITC and really the key of it being successful and helping these projects. We're
actually fairly excited about the ITCs. We've been watching this space for literally years. So we watched the budget with great anticipation a couple of weeks ago. We are still in the first year of the original round of the ITCs, so people are still working out the bugs in terms of what their kind of the paper trail needs to look like, and there are a lot of great accountants and finance professionals out there, providing service to the market. But so far, I'm pretty excited. We have a lot more reading to do as the regulations have come out. The other piece I'll just note, Phil, and this is another one of those things that no one seems to be talking about, is that the ITCs, and this was a recommendation we made it might have been 12 or 18 months ago, making sure the ITCs have some sort of a mechanism that tax-free entities can take advantage of them, so that LPs and REITs can and they've done that. And looking at your the image behind you, and whoever owns those buildings behind you is probably a real estate investment trust, and potentially a zero tax entity. Well, now they can decarbonize those buildings.
It's actually a pension fund. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah,
so
right.
so it's actually it's kind of an interesting. I was really surprised and delighted to see that. So it's not just, it doesn't have to be a corporate entity. It can also be, and this is getting way down into the weeds, but it can also be an LP or a fund.
Yeah, I know. I saw that. That's excellent. It's good to see. Let's talk a bit about social license, and we're seeing First Nations, indigenous equity ownership and participation in these projects as being really critical. What are the optimal legal and corporate structures that successfully de-risk projects for foreign institutional capital to generally fulfill the goals of having, a long-term indigenous partnership for these projects?
Okay, I think that's an excellent question. And as you know, we work a lot with and for Indigenous communities right across Canada, and in fact, elsewhere around the world. And so a couple of points I want to leave people with. We're moving into a world of what I would call the equity first standard. So the duty to consult is great, and the idea that you'll do impact benefit agreements is great. But what First Nations, and obviously you can't generalize, but what we're seeing First Nations really interested in is the equity. It's like we want to be usually 51% shareholders. So we want to take advantage of the skills and experience that may exist outside of the community. So we'll work with the consultant, we'll work with the investor, but we want to be owners. And particularly at the end of project life, we want to have the ability to take over the project or decide what gets done with the project. And then the other piece is, yes, we want jobs, but not just driving the trucks. Driving trucks is great, but now basically First Nations want their children to be running the funds, running the legal documents, learning about the engineering standards. So really upskilling, and so that's really interesting. So we're moving past just impact benefit agreements, moving into an equity first standard, and then the FPIC audit. If people aren't aware of the concept of free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC as it's called, and if you're relying on a document that was signed 10 years ago, with a First Nation, you might want to reopen it because it'll be audited by whoever's going to be cutting a check for financing, and you'll want to be able to say that you've met today's modern standards, and the world's changed a lot. So that would be my all to say, the federal government knows this, the provincial governments know this, every sophisticated investor knows this, and and the First Nations themselves are well aware of it, and they're well advised. They have great financial and legal advisors, and they're it's an exciting time. What's also really exciting is that by having a First Nations partner at the table, that opens a lot of doors and makes a lot of things that weren't possible. So I can't overstate that.
Yeah, no, you make a really good point. I mean, it's the conversations that we're having. It's really a game changer for some of these communities, and really important. It is a generational opportunity to really get this right. The benefits, that both sides really, get to accrue is really important to get this right. What about offtake? I mean, that's been the elephant in the room. What's your view on where this power will go?
The eastern provinces are sitting in a good position. You have multiple markets, and you are in what is, I think, one of the leading jurisdictions in the world, people don't understand Canada's brand has taken off. We are a stable, liberal democracy, open trading nation. If you have data that you want to store, this is a really good place to store it. We don't have a Patriot Act. All to say, this is, Canada's not perfect, but it's a pretty good place to do business, and it's a pretty good place to put a data center. There's the opportunity with AI and building compute power. Atlantic Canada's proximity to European markets in terms of hydrogen and conversion to portable forms of energy. Atlantic Canada's proximity to the American East Coast and the demand centers of New York and Boston and all points in between, incredible. And then Quebec. Quebec is a clean power juggernaut, but it has more demand for power than it can provide. And if you're building a factory in Canada and you're looking for a location, you get off the plane at Montreal, because that's where the energy is cleanest. And then eventually they'll explain to you that they actually can't provide you with power in the short term, So Quebec also, there's an opportunity there to provide power. And I know the premiers, all the premiers in East Coast Canada are well aware of this, that there's a deal to be done with Quebec. And if it can't be done with Quebec, it'll be done with Massachusetts, it'll be done with New York, it'll be done with, any of the other U.S. states. If it can't be done there, it might actually be done locally, or some combination of the above. And I am still very hopeful about a cross-Canada energy corridor, which is something that the Prime Minister made reference to a number of weeks ago. He was speaking to journalists, and he said energy corridor. They said, you mean pipeline? He corrected the journalist and said, no, energy corridor. So that's very exciting. So maybe your energy will be going to BC, one day, or maybe it'll be like that's, to me, and ultimately that's what makes the energy transition in Canada and economic development in Canada, exciting.
It's definitely exciting. I mean, the Wind West of proposal, of course, lots of details there to iron out in advance. It's still early days, but there's lots of optimism and discussion happening around that. With your firm's expertise in the UK specifically, and that's a market that we're quite active in, both the UK and Germany, the UK being the largest offshore wind market outside China. What are some of the lessons that we can leverage from those markets to really accelerate and, increase the probability of success in Canada for us, for offshore wind?
Getting the offshore site permitting right, which the UK did a good job on, and getting that right is crucial. And I think Canada is well on its way there. And then getting transmission sorted out, site to shore transmission, and then onshore transmission as well. Creating the conditions. The OFTO, I remember the original OFTO went to market in 2009, and they recognized the state of the market. So the UK has very, very sophisticated procurement agencies. They're, if not the best, among the best in the world. They're really good at it. So know the market and what the market will bear. And this is hard. Like we don't have the institutional capacity in Canada that they have sitting in London, particularly in our provincial governments. But learning some of those lessons in terms of offshore. And what's great, though, is that as this gets started, those experts are going to they'll start to show up, and they'll start coming to our conferences, and they'll start telling war stories, and the government agencies will engage those professionals, as they always do, and we can learn from those mistakes. But getting the leasing right, getting the permitting right, getting the environmental permitting right. We are not a unitary state the way the United Kingdom is. Although it's hard to say whether you could say that about the United Kingdom anymore, but we do have the federal, provincial, and municipal and indigenous stakeholders at the table, and so we need to always be thinking about that, and we have to get it right at the end of the day. But what's great is that, as I mentioned earlier, this is just chapter 2 in a story that started in the mid 1980s. So this is we already have a proven track record here, Phil. And I was thinking about that as over the last few months, more and more. I was like, yeah, we can actually do this, and we've done it before, and we did it. Building an oil and gas platform is a lot harder than building an offshore wind platform. So we've done it.
the risks are quite different, and in some cases more extreme than for offshore wind. And you're right. I mean, in terms of the expertise coming over, we're already seeing it. We're seeing a lot more inbounds. I'm actually in the UK next week. Proximity is we are across the pond, but it's not that far of a flight.
Yeah, and I guess there's a flight from one of the kind of the second cities in the UK, directly into Halifax, which so you didn't even have to go to Heathrow, which is brilliant, right? So
yeah, we have direct flights to both Heathrow and Gatwick.
Yeah. There's another. I'm trying to remember
there's
the
another
airport.
one. Yeah,
which is great, right? So
yeah. Well, Tom, as we wrap this up, I think of the next generation and impact. Obviously the fundamentals, the economics, the things have to make sense. A side benefit that is a key one is the benefit to the environment, but really the impact for the next generation. What advice would you give to maybe a young lawyer that's looking at the industry and saying, look, should I focus on real estate, or should I focus on a different industry, or is really offshore wind the place where I should focus my next decade or 2 or 3 on? Any thoughts for the younger generation?
I don't think there'll be any trouble. This stuff is happening, and this is exciting. This is where the puck is going, as we like to say in Canada. Young lawyers will find their way. What is really exciting, though, is despite what you read in the news, and Steven Pinker, a great Montreal native, teaches at Harvard, wrote a few wonderful books, including Enlightenment Now a couple of years ago, and he's got a new one out. You only read the bad news in the news. McKinnon's book is hopeful. This stuff is happening. For years, I helped lead our China initiative at Gowling's. I spent a lot of time in Shanghai and Beijing. I was in Shanghai earlier this year. The city of Shanghai is quiet now because of EVs, and literally this is changing our cities and changing our lives, this everything is going to be electrified, and just think along those lines. That's what I would say to young people. Just think along those lines. Virtually everything is going to be electrified. There's going to be low carbon cost to everything you do in your life. And so the heat and the vehicle that you drive and the airplane that you fly and the ship that you're on and the goods everything is going to be about carbon, and carbon is going to be squeezed out of the economy. That creates terrific opportunity. It's also really, I think, going to change the quality of our lives. And I'm, proud and deeply honored to have been part of this, just as you should be, at least part of the early days of this. And I look forward to seeing where it goes. And the solar industries and the storage industries just amaze me. So I'm looking forward to the next few years. I'm optimistic.
Well said, absolutely. And I would just add that the evolution and the acceleration of AI and the data centers and hyperscalers is just adding to the demand and the fundamentals. So, I mean, there's lots of excitement to be had for the need for this renewable energy.
Yeah, and there's a virtuous cycle there too, because those will also inform how we run our grid, which we're just starting to understand. It's really interesting times. So I look forward to working with you.
Well, listen, Tom, I do as well, and I'm sure we'll be chatting again. And time flies. I know we're out of time, but really want to thank you for joining us this week, and look forward to having you again. Join us on another episode.
My pleasure. Nice chatting.
All right.
Take care.
Have a good day.